Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating Q&A live. This is the one promised during the contrast-focused one earlier in the month. Here we are. What are we doing? Well, once a month, we get together for about an hour, maybe a little more, and we try to answer your questions. It's on a Saturday usually, and I try to vary the time. This was a little later because obviously we had our interview earlier today with Travarian. If you haven't yet checked that out, I would highly recommend you go do so. It's a really good video. Travarian's a great artist, so go take a look at that. But for the next hour, we're going to sit here and we're going to, over here, you have a place where you can leave comments. And I'm going to, so go ahead and put your questions in there. And I'm going to do my best over the next hour or so to answer those questions. Okay. All right. And we already have some. I opened it up and saw there were questions waiting. There's a bunch of you already in the chat. So start dropping those questions. I'm sure more people will join in as the hour goes on. So we will do our best. Hopefully I'm coming through okay there. All right. Looks like some more people are asking some questions. So that's good. Looks like a thumbs up that everybody can see, and we're live without issue. So let's do this. Here we go. All right. First off, Carl Rosenberg says, thank you so much for doing this. You occasionally mention using varnish to create a save point in your painting process. Yes, I do. You can varnish midway through painting. Doesn't have to be. It's why I always, if I'm doing true metallic metal, it's always one of the last things I do. And I'll varnish multiple times, usually in a painting process. Are there any tricks to restoring the model to this save point? Sure. So, I mean, you can't, like, it's not... It's not truly a video game save point where you can just go reload it no matter how far you are down the line. But it's very similar in that if you have a sort of a layer of some kind of varnish there, and you're painting some later step and you slip and get paint where it shouldn't be, if you just quickly flood the area and wipe the paint away, it comes off relatively easily because it takes a little longer for the paint to set and adhere into the varnish layer. And when you're wiping it away, it won't, you won't pull up any of the underlying paint, more or less, no matter how much you flood the area. Now, there's a limit to that. So don't just like soak it, and keep scratching with your brush. You will eventually peel up even varnish and paint. But nonetheless, it makes it a lot easier to correct mistakes. It also makes it so when you're putting on additional, perhaps thin glazes, you don't pull up anything from a previous layer. So yeah, that's basically how I use it. I use it most commonly when I'm working a lot with inks, as inks tend to be more reactable with liquid, reactivated, whatever, with additional applications of paint and or ink or whatever. So there you go. All right, Michael Anderson. Some WizKids models, like the Beholder, float above the base on a clear riser. The problem is that the part of the base that is attached to the riser stays white and looks out of place. Any suggestions? Well, sure, I'll give you a couple thoughts. I assume the little riser comes already attached to the base. I haven't gotten any of the WizKids models that are on risers. I've painted some of them, but none of them that have the little floaty stick. So here's a couple thoughts. One, break the riser off the base. Like, if it's possible, just cut it off. Take a sharp set of your clippers or your nippers, lay them flat against the base and move under it and snip like that until you can pop it off. Now, assuming that's not possible, okay, your next option is use some dark inks and just shade the lower part of the riser. Like, take some Payne's gray ink and thin it down and just spray some layers traveling down the riser stick. So the bottom of the riser is enshadowed and you can't see through it as easily to that white part. It'll create an interesting effect anyways, because it'll look like it'll help the lower part disappear. And it'll make sure that that gray that's under the center of like the cross-hatching riser isn't as visible. Third option, depending on what your basing scheme is, if you're using foliage or rocks or skulls or shrubs or tufts, just put a bunch around it and hide the base. That's probably the easiest one. So there you go. Hopefully one of those three things helps. All right. Peter, hi Vince. Like the new Exploring Color series. That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like most people like that. So I'm gonna keep doing those. Question about paint care. You own paints of many different brands. How do you care about them to extend their service life? I do absolutely nothing special with them in any way, shape, or form. I have paint on this wall that I got 5 or 6 years ago, and like certainly probably these blues, or like what's a color I don't touch very often? Probably like this Game Air leather brown that has that nice coat of dust on the top of the thing. That's pretty fun, right? And yeah, I mean, as long as they're sealed well, shouldn't need to do anything. With some of the paints that are more prone to separation, I'll keep a non-ferrous agitator in them, glass bead or pewter, chunk of a pewter miniature, something that won't react or rust over time. But on the whole, as long as they're sealed, bottles like this should keep for ever. I mean, not ever, truly. There's always a little bit of air that can, of course, get in. This isn't truly airtight, but like these are both 5, 6 years old, probably. And I'm shaking them and they're both perfectly liquidy. No issues at all. So, I mean, now my basement's pretty cool, pretty dry. So that probably helps. But yeah, in general, just make sure when you're done with a paint, you're, wiping the tip. I don't generally let a lot of paint build up around the outside of the tip. So you get a nice tight seal back on, and make sure they're tightly sealed, and you should hopefully be good to go. Steph, okay. Vince, I need to know what you think of Auric Warclan so I can have an opinion. Well, not the show we're doing right now, but we'll do a show later on that. Short answer, I'm fine with it. It's strange, but I'm fine with it. So there you go. But Tom and I will probably do a show later tonight about that. Let's see, Dave. You guys heard about that Battle Tome? Yes, again, we'll do that in the show. Jamie, how do you paint red on black without getting it too thick? Here's the answer. Stop painting red on black. That's my best possible answer. Okay? Like, don't do that. Red is a very easy color to paint. It's super transparent. It's one of the easiest colors to work with in our of the color wheel, as long as you're not going over black. Now, there are some reds that have an incredibly opaque coverage. Krill's red comes to mind, okay, as being something with a very high level of coverage. But in general, reds, which lack most any kind of white pigment in their sort of normal formulation, are naturally very transparent. So the answer is prime in a different color. If you can zenithal, do that always and every time. That will make your life 10 million times easier. Now, if you can't zenithal because you don't own an airbrush or you don't own 2 colors of rattle can paint, because you can certainly zenithal with rattle can. Miniac just did a video where he showed you how to do it pretty simply. Then prime in a different color. Like, just don't prime black. Prime in some other neutral-ish tone. And that will make your red a lot easier. Because, I mean, a good red will go on in one coat and turn it red. But that will do that if you're going over some kind of like ivory or, brown or something like that. In general, you get a richer red. Because red is so transparent, it should also be stated that it's one of the colors much more susceptible to your undershade layer in changing how it looks. So that is to say, red over white will have a very different tone and brightness than red over a dark brown. Both will probably read as red, as some kind of red, but it'll be very different in how the saturation of the color, the brightness of the color, all that kind of thing. So there's my advice. All right. Okay. Let's see, John. That's very funny. I hadn't read John's answer yet. Vince is just going to tell you not to paint on black. Yeah, well, there you go. People know me well. That's hilarious. Ralph, let's see. Ralph Hummel, here's a question for you. How do you become more productive? If you have a very busy lifestyle, it takes me 3 weeks to paint a unit of 5. Well, that's tough. I mean, like, I admittedly don't have kids, and so I that's a huge major time sink that's not present in my life. I was lucky enough to see those reveals that people were asking questions about. Basically, the minute they went up, as my dog got sick in the middle of the night, but that's a rare time when I get up. My dog happened to get sick at like 5:05 a.m. right when they posted the article. She must have known. But the short answer is set yourself a schedule and focus on deliberate practice. So what I mean by that is, like, you've got to set aside the time, put it in your phone, schedule it, figure out where you've got a half hour or an hour and make the best use of it. So how do you make the best use of it? Let's assume you can get the time scheduled. Doesn't have to be every day. Aim for every day, but doesn't have to be every day. Some time is better than no time. And if you don't schedule it, you won't do it. And so here's how you make the most of your time. Step 1, have your paint station ready to go. Like, your paint should be out and ready that you're going to use. You should have brushes ready. You should have water ready. Everything should be on your desk so you can sit down and within 5 seconds start painting. Because if you have to prep and set up, you're not going to start. If there's any barrier of entry to you sitting down, you'll just not do it. So keep a space. And by the way, even if you don't have a lot of space in your house, I mean, just like, you need the space of an elementary school child's desk somewhere that just has your stuff set up on it. It doesn't have to be some massive thing. And then focus on deliberate practice. So what I mean by that is, don't just paint. Paint with intention. And so if you're limited on time and speed is of the essence, then and that's what you're trying to improve, then focus on that. Set yourself a limit. Look into techniques for speed painting. Look at things I talk about, like zenithaling and glazing and sketch styling and whatever else you want, right? Like wet blending, base coats. Like, there's 100 ways to speed paint. Start practicing those. Don't use slower techniques. Okay. And instead focus on getting stuff together faster, making the most use of your time. Work your speed muscle. And as you build that up over time, you'll see better results. And even though you have not as much time to spend, you'll have an outsized impact with the time you do spend. That's my best advice. Let's see. Emily, I've been having a little trouble pouring water effects around edges where there is uneven rock overlapping at the base. Anything you can use that helps prevent leakage, use tape and blue tack. It's really hard. My best advice is, like, I've had the same problem, Emily. You're not alone. My best advice is make sure nothing overhangs the base at all if you're going to try to use water effects, because you almost can't seal it tight enough that it's not going to leak through. Okay. If it has some unusual shape to it. If you can get a smooth adherence around there, you'll have a better time. Now, Green Stuff World just came out with like silicone, like little cupcake molds. I don't know how else to describe it. I think they only have ovals right now, but I'm sure they'll have more like rounds and stuff very shortly. But they're exactly meant to fit every size of like GW oval base down in them. And it creates a perfect seal around the base. So ostensibly, as long as nothing overhangs the base, you can just push it down in there and then pour, and you'll have a perfect seal because you're in like a mold is basically what you've done there. So I'm going to pick some of those up because I'm fascinated by that. I think that's super cool. They definitely need to do rounds. But my best advice with that is, if you're going to go the direction of having like a lot of uneven rocks, then do much, much smaller pours to directly solve the problem you're asking. Instead of trying to do the whole pour, even if the whole pour is this, just do the thinnest layer. Like, lay a layer down so thin that the surface tension of it will hold it in place and it won't run. Let it dry. It'll dry quicker because it's a thin layer. Do it again. Do it again. do it again, do it again, do it again. It takes longer, but you won't have leakage. If you're just like literally applying this, couple millimeters of layer every time. So then you'll eventually build up over the rocks and kind of get to a flat place, and you can then kind of just work on top of it. All right. Joseph, let's see. I've just ordered the ink set from Warcolors based on your video. I plan on using them as glazes. Any tips? Should you thin them with water or medium? They're very thin and light as it is. But that being said, so you don't need to thin them much. A drop or so of something like a medium or a flow aid could be good depending on what you're trying to achieve. They're really good through the airbrush, though, because they have a shellac medium, they don't always mix with other paints. So you'll want to kind of, be careful on that. They'll mix with most, but there's a few they have odd reactions with. But I really love them as like filters and glazes, especially through the airbrush. So that's my advice, is like, you don't necessarily need to thin them at all. They're already pretty thin, pretty weak. There are some colors that are a lot stronger than others. But yeah, a little bit of medium or a drop of flow aid or something can help you out. Let's see. Crazy Horse, how is the cloning process going? Are you getting more stuffs done now that there are multiples of you? Yeah, it really helps. It really helps. By the way, Anthony, that right there, this thing sitting behind me, has some buildings on it. It would in a moment. It will when I'm finished. And those buildings are from you, so thank you. Okay. Let's see. Rob, did I see the new Creature Castor paints? Yes, I did. I've got them on the way, so I'm going to be excited about those. And I'll certainly give them a test. But looking at the colors, I'm super excited. I'm also very interested to try the new transparent stuff, see how that looks. So always cool. How disappointed are you with Tom for missing NashCon? Disappointed, but not surprised. There is a difference. Let's see. The Red Wizard. I've been using Vallejo plastic putty to fill some gaps, but it seems kind of sloppy and hard to control. Should I think that, or is there a tip to applying it to the gap besides just slathering it on? Oh, thin it. Okay, got it. Now I understand. Should I thin it, or is there a tip? Okay, now I understand. Sorry. Yeah, so I use it pretty frequently. I would also highly recommend this stuff if you want a little more. This is a little better version of that. Perfect Plastic from Deluxe Materials. There you go. It's that one. Number BD44. Scale and Plastics Railway Miniatures. Yeah. Anyway, I've had really good luck with this one. It shrinks less. So there you go. Now, should you thin it? Yeah, sort of. That is to say, I will generally mix it with a little water. Not a lot. Like, I'll get my brush wet, basically, and have a very wet brush, and use that to kind of just paint it on. And then I kind of just keep painting it. And then I go back and get the brush very wet, and I smooth the edge, let it dry, and then sand it down with some 400 grit. So that's been my trick. I find you need a little bit of water to get it actually, like, working and controllable in some way. Otherwise, it's just really flaky. So that's my advice. Andrew, what happened to the Friday topic of the week? It wasn't a great use of my channel or my time if I didn't have anything to talk about. Like, the problem with it was I was often just making content to sort of make it. I didn't really have anything I was trying to say. And I didn't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be on a treadmill of making something just to make something. Like, I do this kind of stuff because I like sharing tutorials. I like helping people learn. I do Warhammer Weekly because it's news. I do the interviews because I like doing the interviews, and the PMP reviews because I like helping people take their next step on their journey. Like, all of those had a point, right? And that one really doesn't. Now, that being said, I'll still do it. I'll just like I do any other one-off thing. If there's something that comes up I feel I need to talk about. rather than sort of force myself to just make a 5-minute video where I ramble about nothing in particular. I'll make a 20-minute video about something I'm actually passionate about. So they'll still be around if something catches my attention or I feel there's a topic that needs a good rant. But for the most part, that's what happened to it. Okay. All right. Adrenaline. Did I miss your video tutorial on yellow Imperial Fist that you posted on Instagram? If not, how much money do I have to throw at the monitor to see it soon? No, it's going to come. There's just a lot of other videos I have sort of queued up. So I will tell you it's not going to be soon, but but it's coming. There is a miniature that I already know I'm going to use for it. Just the nature of the projects I needed to work on meant that, like, you know, sometimes my tutorials, I try to work them into the projects I'm actually working on if I feel there's a good alignment there. So for example, I posted the Slanesh mirror hand claw things endless spell today. Like, I did a tutorial on that mirror and how I paint mirrors, right? So like, that's a thing I've wanted to cover for a long time. I was working on it. Great. Perfect alignment, right? And I needed to get that spell ready for a tournament army next month anyways. But that guy, like, is always going to be like, that is, I'm not actually doing an Imperial Fist army, or there's no real reason to do it, but I definitely want to get that out there because I love that Imperial Fist. I love painting Imperial Fist. I think they're super fun. So it will come. It might be a little while, but I promise it will happen. All right. Berserk. Hey, Vince, any tips on doing a mountain summit type snow base? I'm probably overthinking it. Sure. Like, you want the top of a mountain, like maybe for a KO skyship or something. I would build it up using pink foam, this stuff back here, right? So I build a big triangular, semi-triangular thing. Like, mountaintops aren't actually triangles or cones. So, like, go look at mountaintops and see how they often have this kind of shape to them with like a slightly flat ridge here, and they'll come down. There'll be another ridge around here. You know, just like make those interesting structures. And then, you know, cut into the pink foam. I would then, and get it in shape. I would then coat the pink foam in something like some kind of substance. So like, don't use that straight. So put some texture on it, like some Vallejo white stone paste might be a good one, for example, where you could then sort of have that granite rocky texture. You could also use like some DAP and then put some other mud over it and kind of play around with different textures like that. But have those like flat spaces so the snow can gather, because what you ostensibly want for a snowy topped mountain is like pretty much snow cover on the horizontal flat spaces and basically nothing other than some drying, you know, some little bit of blowing snow that you kind of dry brush a little bit on the sides, right? Where the snow doesn't really stick and it kind of all falls down. That would be my advice. Think like how a Bob Ross painting looks when he does snowy mountains. That's, I guess, what I would say. All right, Ghislaine. Question: how to make gold flow through smoother on a model, especially Vallejo Gold? Which gold are you using? Gold flow smoother on a model. Which Vallejo Gold? The answer is you buy these two golds right here, Vallejo Metal Color Gold and Copper, and you mix 2 drops of this, or sorry, 3 drops of this to 1 drop of this, and you get so 3 drops of gold to 1 drop of copper, and you get a real super rich gold color that flows like an ink and is the easiest thing in the world to paint and is unbelievably opaque. And that's what you do. That's a short answer. And you never struggle with annoying golds again. We'll see. Painting the Batmobile Tumbler model car. I got an airbrush. It needs to be durable more than pretty. Any advice and paint suggestions? Durable, okay. I assume this has to be for a game or something. Sure. I mean, I don't know that any paint's going to be more durable than anything else. My advice is exactly what I said before. Varnish early, varnish often, right? Like as you're working through it with various layers of paint, you know, lay down your primer, put a layer of varnish over the primer. Why not? It's fine. Then put down your initial, you know, sort of base colors, throw a layer of varnish over that. Then do some more highlighting, throw a layer of varnish over that. I mean, when I do my Night Titans, I varnish them 10 times throughout the time I'm working on them, probably, right? So, and what you get is a pretty durable, you know, solid paint there. So I can't think of any particular brand that has like an unbelievable durability. I've never seen a, I'd need to see some kind of science behind that one. All right, the planet. We're just going to go with that. How would you go about painting amber with it being more complex for how lighting affects it than other gems having yellow, orange, and brown tones, and lighting affecting it different from other gems? That's interesting. I'll openly admit I've never painted amber or thought about how I would paint amber. I mean, I would paint it still like a normal gem, I think. Depending on like, if assuming it was cut like a gem and so had similar facets, I would just probably use a much broader midtone volume. So like oftentimes with a gem, we tend to quite evenly distribute the light to dark spread on the facet. I would probably use a much broader middle tone facet and then fade into your light part, maybe at the bottom, on the bottom, like 20% of the facet, and have a very minimal, like 10% dark up top, where it just, and instead of going into something darker, like from that sort of yellow, I'd probably go into maybe like a light rust color. I don't know. That'd be an interesting challenge. The other thing you could do is put something inside of it, depending on the nature of the gem. Like you could freehand something inside of it, but it would need to be like a flat piece of amber up against something. It couldn't be like a 3-dimensional gem, because then if you just, no matter where you paint it, it's going to look false when you move around it. But if it's like a flat gem on the front of something, you could, you know, freehand a little insect or something inside and then lay your orange glazes over top, and it would look like it was trapped inside there as you put the little bug or creature or whatever through the mosquito. If we're going Jurassic Park style, it would look like it was sort of caught under some of that amber. So could be. All right. Rob, I'm pretty happy with how I do assemblies, but I would love to see how you do them. Currently use liquid mask. I'm not sure what you mean, Rob. Give me some more detail on that. Like, do you mean sub-assemblies? What are you meaning? Let's see. Morgan, how do you paint red after zenithal highlighting without letting it turn pink? Well, you just apply red a couple times. Red over just white will look red. Red over the pink that was the first layer over will turn red. So if you go back and look at my like a couple of different videos I've had on painting red, like anything where I'm painting red with glazes, there's one where I use some bloodletter glaze. The first bloodletter glaze will look very red. Or sorry, will look very pink. The second one will look basically red. The third one will look intense red. The key is to use things like red ink, so it remains highly transparent the whole time, and all you're doing is filtering it through more layers of red. And so the brightness of the white reflection comes through, but it's filtered through so many layers of red that it just becomes an intense, bright red, right? Now, beyond that option, okay, of just kind of applying multiple glazes over it or something like that, or layers in general. The other option is you readjust your undershade color. So instead of using dead white, use something like this, right? Ooh. Which is like hikey yellow, right? Some kind of, or like Reaper golden blonde, right? These, if you use them as your highlight, like on a miniature, these will look very much like white. If you put this on a miniature and it's not next to actual dead white, these will look a lot like white. If you then put red over them, it'll be much closer to real red because they have this warm yellowish brown tone in them. So you can go either direction and get to a true red. Let's see. All right, Wasorin. Question. I am painting an Infernal and Rapturous And in painting the harp, I am having issues trying to paint bruised and battered skin. What suggestions would you have for painting things like that? I would suggest the video I have on cuts and scratches and bruises, wherein I show you how to paint the flesh like that. So go watch that for the longer answer. It's like pretty early on. It's in like the 60s, I think, is the particular hobby cheating on that. I still have that giant from the video. He's over there. He's part of my giant army. The short answer is you want to work some purple and crimson tones around the area of the wound, with very light scarred pink being the actual flesh closest. So like if let's say we're talking about an exposed tear in the skin, the edge should be like basically a light pinky flesh tone going into a deeper bruise of a purple and then fading out into like a crimson-y color. Okay. So there you go. I hope that helps. For more detail on seeing how I execute on it, if you look in that video, you'll see what I mean. Abraxas. Hi, Vince. Have you tried the new contrast paints on a warm zenithal? I've only seen videos with traditional black, gray, white style. Yeah, I mean, in the video that I did in the ultimate guide to contrasts, I'm using ivory with a purple undershade on one of those dudes. So that's pretty close to what you're talking about. But yes, I have done it with, say, a brown to an ivory, and it works awesome. They're great. It's fantastic, actually. They're wonderful, just like warm inks are on there. In fact, you may see some of that when I do the Imperial Fist video. Because spoilers, one of my favorite, my 3 favorite colors in the line. People ask, like, are you really using contrast? Right next to my desk is where I keep all my current paints that are in progress. I have a bunch of different paints for this recent project I just finished today. But like right there, Griffhound Orange and Fire Slayer Flesh. And then Eenden Yellow. Like, I really like those 3 colors. And I actually tend to use them quite often. I think they're great. So there you go. Let's see. Omri. Thank you. Came by chance to this live and you answered Emily's question, which has been carrying in his mind as well. Oh, awesome. Can you use Vaseline to separate the mold from the poured water? I don't know. I haven't looked at the instructions for him yet. I know previously, if you're doing a lot of things like that, having some kind of release agent was generally a good idea, but they're silicone. And so in general, silicone won't stick to stuff like that. It should just be able to pull away, but who knows? I will tell you when I get them and try them, because I will do that. I'm very excited about them. I love stuff like that. It's so simple and easy and dumb. And I made a whole army, that whole army that's on those ice bases. Every one of those bases was poured using, basically what Emily described, tape and blue tack, and just pour after pour. And there was always lots of leakage, and it was, it was doable, but frustrating. Right. So just having a kind of auto way to do it seems pretty cool. Andrew. So I get excited building models and even look forward to painting them until I start to put paint on them. How do I push through really not liking my attempts? Well, it's a tough question. Why aren't you liking your attempts, Andrew, would be my next question. Is there a delta between what's in your head and what you think, what you think you're going to be able to achieve, and then what you actually do? Is it, if so, then the answer is, reset your expectations. Don't set your expectations from the box art that the heavy metal team, wherein you've got a team of people who've all been painting. The least experienced person in that studio probably has more than a decade of painting under their belt, of significant painting under their belt. And every model they paint gets reviewed by the other 9 of them. This is a really critical thing to understanding why the heavy metal team is so good. It's a slight tangent, but it's an interesting point. And so the heavy metal team, when they have a certain number of hours set aside to paint their figures. And when they do a piece, one of the later steps is it goes around the studio. So if person A paints something, then persons, 2 through 10, all look at it and give feedback and look for errors and talk about improvements and stuff like that. So it's a collaborative process. That's so strong. That is an incredible luxury. I am unbelievably jealous of that, of being able to work in a collective like that with other talented painters, have that fast feedback. So anyway, the point is, don't try to live up to that unless you happen to have 9 heavy metal painters sitting in the room with you. So if that's the case, you just got to reset your expectations to your own level. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Compare to the last miniature you painted. And as long as you're getting better, you're doing a good job. Now, if things are just taking too long, like if you want to be done faster, then again, work your speed muscle. What I said earlier, right? So put some deliberate practice into techniques of speed painting, zenithaling and dry brushing, and then inking. Like, go look at my how do I speed painted a 2,000 point army in a week video, right? Which I'm excited that army's getting a new book. But the point is that follow tips and tricks like that. So that way you don't get frustrated. You don't hit that point, right? And because there are sort of 2 big muscles people don't often talk about you have to build up when you're painting. One is speed, but the other is endurance, right? Like, to paint a competition model means not stopping and often not getting frustrated and putting in 40 hours, 60 hours, 100 hours, 150 hours, and more. Like, when you push and push and push and push and push. Now, that's probably not what you're doing for your army. But to even spend any amount of time on an individual miniature is a buildup of endurance, So you got to, it's just like it's no different than a distance runner, right? They don't just go out and run, like do an Ironman triathlon the first time out. Right? They build up to that slowly. So hopefully one of those 2 things help. If you've got any other thoughts, or you want to be more specific, I can certainly try to answer those. When are we going to get an index to your videos? An index. Well, they're in a playlist. I want to make some sub playlists. I just haven't done it yet, mainly because of laziness. And I'm only making it worse because I keep adding more videos. But like, I want to do like a basing track and a beginner track and a speed painting track and stuff like that. But I mean, what would I do for an index besides have the playlist that you can scroll through and see all of them? And I just like when I look up my own videos, because I mean, I have to look up my own videos a lot too, because people will ask like, hey, can you link me to this thing? Oh, sure. Here you go. Like, I just go to the hobby cheating playlist and then Control F and jump to the video. So like, what do you need? If you tell me what you're looking for, I can help. Let's see. Joshua got the Pro Krill line. Yeah, they're great. They really are. There are like 4 of them over here right now in my currently used paint area out of 16 paints or something, which is a strong sign. Let's see. Joseph, I mainly use Vallejo, Ammo by MiG, and AK. Will they be compatible with the War Colors inks? Couldn't say for sure. I mean, as long as we're talking all acrylics, as far as the paint itself goes, yes, probably. I can't think of any challenge I had with them. Yeah, give it an experiment is my best answer, but I can't think of any reason. I think the only time I had some weird reactions was with what was I doing? I mixed them with like another unusual ink, and I got a strange reaction out of them. So, like that whatever medium was in ink B interacted weirdly with the shellac medium in the War Colors ink. I don't think I've ever had an issue with paint mixtured. Bass it's too many consonants in a row. Any tips on painting gray stone or stone in general, particularly carved stone or stone in architecture, stone tiles? Yes. Go and look at my realistic weathered stone tutorial. Again, it's early on, probably like in the 50s or something. I would just go to that playlist and hit Control F. But yeah, go there. Here's the short answer. Stone isn't gray. Stone is colored. It has lots of colors to it. Lots of colors. No matter what, no matter where, no matter how, it has colors to it. It's in the rain. There's organic material that attaches. So there should be blacks and browns and greens and, purples and reds and all that stuff should appear in your stone. And the more you work in those kinds of color variations through pigment, washes, stippling, the more realistic it'll feel. That is to say, if we're talking about any kind of natural or masoned stone, right? Now, something like marble, that's a completely different animal, right? That's a whole different shooting match. Now, the other key is to use a lot of different techniques to make your stone interesting. So stipple some texture into it. I always stipple my stone some, like take a small dry brush or a brush or just start like stabbing that thing, because stone has really, is generally going to have some kind of heterogeneous texture to it. Have cracks, things like that, like paint freehand cracks into your stone. It's the simplest thing in the world. It's a little thin black line and a very tiny white gray line on the reverse light side of it. Right. And it makes all the difference in the world. So yeah, little stuff like that is generally how I go. But, beyond that, work with other colors. Don't just make your stone gray. Make it clay colored or terracotta colored or, more brown for sandstone, and mix in all the things I just said. Like take all of that and just go nuts and start whipping them together and seeing what you like. Let's see. Kendon, question. What approach techniques would you use for painting something like Thousand Suns, rubric marines, lots of colored panels, lots of gold detailing? Well, I have done those models before. I painted the Thousand Suns sorcerers for the diorama I did for the White Dwarf Golden Demon like Winners Challenge thing last year. And I suppose the easiest way to do this is, let's just take a look here in a moment. Okay. So let's actually do this. We'll do a fun little thing here, since I can answer this in this way. Share my screen. So here's the Thousand Sun Sorcerer I did. They're all battling Celestine. And, the short answer is it's meticulous work. Like, these are meticulous figures. They're not a thing you can do fast, right? Now, I will say what I did is I, zenithal the model in a standard way and then applied a relatively transparent blue over all of them, and then started building from there. And, what I mainly did was try to work edges wherever they were visible to build in highlights. Like you can see the edges here on his chest plate, where I've, darkened the line between each panel and highlighted the edge of each panel. Tried to bring highlights up here, shadows down here. So that's all just building additional contrast into the, the tone. And then once I was happy with all of the matte colors, I came back in, I varnished the miniature, and then came back in and did all the gold, right? And so the gold is just done with the gold technique that I mentioned earlier. And see if we can get another picture. There you go. That's a good zoom in on him there. The gold was done in all the same way, within, inks and shades applied to get this color tonal variation, and then silvers to highlight, right? Like the edges and stuff like that. So yeah, basically that's what I did. So the answer is, I think that a zenithal and a thinner shade is a good way to start, because it'll give you a nice sketch for your blue tone. Build out the blue and then edge the gold, I guess, is the best. Like, build out your blue completely, give it its edges, give it its panel lines, give it its separation, and then do the gold. But all that Tzeentch stuff they're just complicated models. There's not a huge amount of shortcuts, unfortunately, because there's just so much detail. Emily says Vallejo metal color has changed her life. It will. It is a life-changing paint. Once you use Vallejo metal color, you will throw every other metal paint in the trash. Okay. Eric, it's a weird question, but how do you highlight camouflage tank? Because the whole purpose camouflage is hard lines. Yeah, sure. I mean, the answer is you still kind of do the lines, right? Like, I understand the tactical purpose to camouflage is to make it look more squidgy and uneven and break up the inorganic shape of sort of the tank and make it harder to pick out and all that kind of thing. But okay. Let's assume like a traditional sort of jungle camo. So it's probably got like some greens and browns and blacks and stuff, right? Where that goes over the edge, I would still have my normal contrast of like whatever the panel is, however the panel is modulated. And then I would still have like a slightly lighter edge. you can always wheel it back and not go with as hard edges. That's always a possibility, right? So you don't have to be as sharp as, like, say, the GW Studio might go on like an ultramarine tank, but you still want some kind of little light catch there, right? I think that's basically what I do. I'd, take it back by about 20% or something like that. Whatever you feel is the right number. All right. Wampa Loompa. Oh, that's a good name. Hi Vince, I am following you for about a year now, and I think I watched most of your videos. Excellent. And you just want to say thanks. Oh, well, that's awesome, man. I'm super glad to hear that. All right. Rob says, yeah, sub-assemblies. Was typing on his phone earlier. Yeah, I mean, I can do a video on sub-assembly sometime, and what I do. I mean, the answer is I always use as few sub-assemblies as possible, and I always try to make sure they're in a place where I can hide them well. So, like, take the Sister of Battle, Sister Amalia, or whatever, like I did her, right? Her sub-assemblies were, her backpack was off, as you normally do with Space Marine type models, and her head was separate, so I could, have full access to it because they have these big collars, right? I didn't really need to do anything with those to fit them in, because the nature of the joints that hide those two things together are really hidden. So, like, in general, assemble the model as much as you can and make sure what you leave off is a joint that is going to be hidden once assembled. Those are kind of my best answers, I suppose. All right. Anthony Byers says a monochromatic paint scheme for his Malifaux crew. How to go about planning and painting. Sure. So monochromatic schemes are always challenging because they're challenging to be, like, visually interesting. My best answer is, when you think monochromatic, it's not really monochromatic. You're talking about variation on a theme, and you can play on that by, much as I did with green in the Exploring Green video today. You can explore with different volumes, different highlight colors. So instead of, like, just using white to highlight, use some white, use some gray, use some yellow, use some blue, right? And play around with sort of how your highlights work and things like that. Same with shade colors, use some dark reds or dark purples, so you can sneak other colors in. You can effectively smuggle them in through the main color, right? Secondly, you may want to think about something like a pop color. I don't know. Think like, what was that crappy movie? The Spirit? Is that what it was? I don't know, Sam Jackson. But it's like black and white, but there was like red elements on the screen. Like there's a red apple or a red scarf. You can think about a single color like that. That's complementary or highly contrasting to what's already there. But I mean, in general, it's tough. It's really tough to sell a monochromatic thing. What's more interesting, color television or black and white television? Colors are interesting. Now you could go monochromatic in a color, but it's still going to be flatter. But my best advice is smuggle other colors in through the highlights and lowlights, and that will help. Let's see. Sorry, my chat jumped. Did we already talk about the AOS Day spoilers? No, not during this. We will later on. Tom and I are going to do a show. How would you make a GW Nurgle green with Pro Acryl paints? I would use the camo green, what they have, and probably a little yellow and a touch of the light umber. That's what I would do. And that'll give you a really, really nice, sickly green, yellow, brown, basically, because that's what that Nurgle color is. It's pushed into the brown yellow tone from green. Let's see. Galen, any tips for playing Blades of Corn more effectively? Not really what this is about. I sure. Pop into a different show and I'll make sure we get you the answers to that. Or like leave me a comment. I'm happy to talk about it down there. Do I prefer demons or mortals? I'll give you quick answers. I prefer mortals, but that's kind of mixed. I like a good mix. That's really the answer. I like a couple of the demon models. I really like Skull Crushers. But I also like skull cannons, and so on and so forth. Like I have my units I like. Now, as if you're asking like competitively, I mean, there's a certain standard set. My best advice is there's a couple lists bubbling up right now, so I would say hit up the Honest Wargamer and see who's doing well with the Blades of Corn list recently. I'll openly admit I don't have my finger on the pulse post the GHB updates, so I don't know what new lists are really out there. But I would check that out. I'm sure there's some people. Certainly, probably. There's a lot of potential now. Let's see. Take over Mars. Hi Vince, I have a few questions. How would you make obsidian weapons? Oh boy, I get this question a lot. Here's my short answer. I wouldn't. Okay. All right. But let's keep going. I'll give you a real answer in a minute. How would you make embery looking skin? In other words, somebody who's, I assume what you're saying is somebody who's like made of fire or is internally hot. And how would you make it look like rocks or liquids rising from magic effects? Well, take over Mars. You're asking for 3 of the more complicated things you can theoretically do. So, like all of those could have 5,000 words written about them easily, and it still probably wouldn't be enough. But let's take it in turn here. How would I do obsidian? I wouldn't, because black is boring and shiny black is just more boring or black. Now, if you really want to do it, you have 2 options. Option the first is you manually recreate the obsidian reflections. So go look at a piece of obsidian, which looks like glass and will be mostly deep black, and then transition through a short gray volume into pure white reflections, basically, right? And you would manually recreate that entire very careful blend, and you'd make sure the edges are sharp with a white highlight where the glassy edge is catching light on the edge like a gem, and you kind of blend back and forth. You maybe use a little bit of a very, very deep red brown to add a slight interference color in there, stuff like that, right? That's option the first. It is slow, slow, slow. Here's option the second. Get yourself some glossy black paint or ink and paint the thing and call it a day. Its reflections will be out of scale, so it won't look as good as it could, but it'll look okay. I mean, I know that's a really, really unfulfilling answer. The problem is when you go to something that's like high gloss, you can't paint and highlight it because your highlights will clash with the highlights of the paint. And so you'll get these weird sections where, like, when someone turns the miniature, your light is still up here, but the light from the surface is now reflecting this bright white point here, but in what you've decided is a shadow. So it's either got to be, all high gloss or none. That's my best answer. Embry looking skin. Got a couple different options. You can either manually make the low points to be like yellow, orange, hot, and then basically reverse your entire paint scheme, ending at black. So normally, like, the lower parts are darker and the higher parts are lighter. Reverse the whole deal. The other option is you can bring some technical paints into it, and you can like paint the whole thing in sort of yellows and oranges and deep reds, and then you can lay down a layer of like the crackle paint over it, like a sort of like a Martian iron crust or something like that. And you can just let it break up, and then as it's dried but hasn't started to split, you paint that black. So those are options. Yeah. And then how would you make it look like rocks or liquids raising from magic effects? My best advice here is go to Massive Voodoo. Roman wrote a whole article on this, and it's the best on the subject. He takes you through exactly how he constructs his effects. He's done a lot of miniatures that have this floating effect. I mean, the short answer is you take some kind of like little plastic sticks. There's a lot of different options out there for what you can use. I often use like the old flight sticks from GW, and you heat them and you stretch them and you make little vertical, strong plastic sticks that are, semi-clear. And then you stick other little elements to them, and that gives you the effect. But if you go to Massive Voodoo and search for the article on magic effects, you'll find it. And Massive Voodoo is just a wonderful site in general for all sorts of great tutorials. Let's see. Working on a marble-like enchanted realmstone weapons. Would you use a sponge stippling technique or assisting technique for a marble-like effect on an area the size of a wildwood ranger glaive? Definitely like sponge and stippling. It's too small to sis. Ithlin, would you recommend any contrast paint to speed a dock army? Sure. I mean, yeah, it depends on what your color scheme is, but absolutely. I mean, it's no different than any contrast paints can be used in the same way as thinned inks over sort of zenithal, right? So, and will produce similar but not exactly the same effects. So, yeah, sure, absolutely, you could still do that. They have a lot of flesh, a lot of the same thing. So you could use any kind of flesh tone. Would you thin them a little bit? Yeah, in general, I think it's a good idea to thin most stuff like that. It's a little more transparent. So, but sure. Wade, I can't help you figure out how to get that war score rewritten, buddy. Unfortunately, that one's out of my purview. Omri, let's see. Talking about the leak out of pouring. It's terrible. All right. So we're about an hour in, so we're gonna go into some hurry up mode here. I'm gonna try to because I want to make sure I get all the questions. So I'm gonna try to be quick. Here we go. Diva, question over applying zenithal. I just can't paint a completely assembled miniature. If I want to paint in sub-assemblies, can I still zenithal effectively? Well, my first question is, why can't you paint a completely assembled miniature? Assemble your miniatures. What are you doing? No. I mean, well, yeah, kind of. Like, I only sub-assembly if I absolutely have to. Now, that being said, sure, just put it together with blue tack and then zenithal it and then take it back apart. That's what I do all the time when I have sub-assemblies. Like, I just I put the miniature together I glue everything I'm going to glue, blue tack the sub-assemblies together, zenithal it, take it back apart. Hey, Vince, how would one go about non-metallic gold battle damage? Same as anything else. Scratches and scrapes. Like you put dark sort of purple black cuts in it or scrapes in it or stuff like that. And you underline it with a sort of white yellow to show the reflection point of where it's the gold has been scratched into high reflection. My magic chicken down there, you can barely see him. That's his wing. Like my Lord of Change. I did that all over the place. Little dots, scrapes, scratches, same as anything else. You just want to be very thin with it. Well, thank you, Emily. Let's see. Yes, I'll definitely do more color videos. Any suggestions on Nurgle schemes that don't involve any bright greens? Yeah, sure. Like purples. Tom did his Blight Kings and some Plague Bearers and stuff in purples. I really like it. A good faded purple can be like faded purple, especially into purple gray, will still give you sort of a sickly effect, but it won't. But it's won't have any green in it. Let's see. If you want to bug him on Twitter, I'm sure he's happy to share his photos. I don't have them, but I know he does, and they look good. Like I think it's a really good scheme for Nurgle. Let's see. Nazgub, have you ever thought of making some video content on contrast paints next steps, meaning what color should follow as a layer glaze to improve highlights? I do it in the Ultimate Guide to Contrast. So I have a section called like additional techniques and blending. And what you see me do there is literally exactly what I would do. That's how I painted those Bestigors. I started with contrast and then did the next steps. So that video is all time coded in the description. So if you jump up to those sections, you'll see exactly what I do. Let's see. With Soren, the Cypher Lords are Warcry Warband from Heish. When you paint yours, will you model the bases if it's from Heish? If so, how would you do it? I already ordered them, and no, I don't know how I'm going to paint them yet. But that seems like a great challenge. I don't know. We don't have a lot of information on Heish. It's sort of these, in the few pictures we have, it's these big, like, obelisks and pillars and sort of bright things. Assumingly there's a desert there somewhere or something like that, as well as other interesting terrain. Like you see that all of the realms seem to have most ecosystems just twisted to their, particulars. So like even in Shaiish and Death, there's grasslands, but it's all sort of dead or weak or dying grass, and so on and so forth, right? So Akshi has grasslands too, but it's mostly like burnt and dry grass and whatever. I don't know. I'd have to really think. I have to think about that because I certainly want to do that warband. I want to do a couple warbands of different things, but the Cypher Lords and are first up on the docket. I don't know. I'll probably when I do it, I'll talk about it. It's a challenge I need to think through. Let's see. Okay. All right, just looking through the content. Well, thank you, Joseph. That's really appreciated. Let's see. W. Soren, in question related to the camo highlighting, if you wanted to highlight a colorful printed blouse on a woman, how would you paint that? You two choices. Okay. So choice number one, you sketch all the highlights on the underlying shirt first, and you apply the printed pattern using very thin glazes that will preserve your existing undershading. Option the first. Option the second, you manually make the appropriate areas light and the appropriate areas dark, right? Like that is to say, let's imagine you had a pattern of those little commas. What do they call those? I don't know. Like you had a floofy shirt from like the 70s with those little, you know what I mean? Those little commas on them. It's not what they're called. But if you had some of them up here in the light, you would, and maybe they were going to be pink. So like the up top here where the light is, you would paint it more bright pink with a little more white or gray or flesh or something. As you get down here in the shadow, you would go into more deeper pink or red. And you fashion each one very like that carefully, just like you would highlight in low light anything else. Obviously the first method is easier, but won't produce as much contrast. Okay. Bassmith Physics. Any tips for painting assembled models? I have an Iron Jaws War Chainer that feels like it will be a terror to paint. This model made me a member of the Sub-Assembly for Life Club. Yeah, I mean, I did sub-assemble all of my Iron Jaws in that I left their armor off. So that was the only sub-assembly I did for them. Like, take the Brutes, for example. They have like a front plate and a back plate and then like their shoulders. I basically assembled the shoulders to the back plate. And then, so I had then two pieces of armor, like a back and two shoulders in the front. And then, would paint the whole orc in the armor and then just encase them in their armor. But how to paint them? Honestly, it's not that tough. Like that being said, I did do a couple with their armor attached. It's not actually that bad. Because most of the areas that are hard to get to with your brush with the Iron Jaws, especially on the War Chainer who's, woo, he's doing this. There's not that many areas that are readily visible that are covered up. So, I don't think you'll have any big challenges. My best advice is just keep the areas under the armor, like where the armor would be like here and has this gap like that. Make this area deeply shadowed, like shoot some dark color in there or take your brush and start by jamming dark color up in there, right? So one of the ways to tackle sub-assemblies like that is before you start painting anything else, you take some dark shadow color on your brush and you just shove paint in there aggressively and who cares what else it gets on. And then you paint the rest of the miniature that you can actually touch. And that kind of is a nice way to go about it. Okay, Andrew. No, that's not a stupid question at all. It happens a lot. Every time I use parchment paper for a wet palette, it never sits flat on the paper towel. Like it shrivels up and creates folds. Any thoughts on fixing that? Yes, you have one of two problems happening. Here's problem one. Your parchment paper is running off the side of your sponge. Okay, so how your parchment paper should sit, okay, is if this is your sponge, your parchment paper should be like this, surrounded on all sides. Now, it doesn't have to actually be this small. It could be bigger, right? Like whatever. Okay, sure, fine. The problem is if it's like this, all right, if this is how your parchment paper is sitting, this is going to dry and curl because this has nothing under it keeping it wet and it's exposed to the air on both sides. It's going to dry out and start wicking water out and through here like the capillary action of the drying effect will pull all the water out of it and it will dry. And as it does so and leaves behind the residue of the water, it will start to do that. Okay. So if it's centered and every part of it has wet palette under it, it will not happen. The other key is when you first set it down, it's going to want to curl like initially because it hasn't gotten completely adhered yet. So you just keep flattening it back out, flattening it back out, flattening it back out, and it should be fine. And once you've created that seal and the water's really kind of like created that that tension to the paper, it should stick there and stay there. Okay. Oh, second option is there's just not enough water in your wet palette. Sorry. Which, you know, if that's happening, add more water. Like you should see some standing water on the side of your sponge. It shouldn't be like a pool in there, but there should be standing water on the side of your sponge. So, let's see. Nazgub, another question. How would you paint realistic battles? Realistic battles for gits. I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean bottles? I don't know what you mean by battles. Bottles, I would follow my bottle painting video that I did using the Fungoid Cave Shaman. Battles, I'm not sure how I'd paint a whole battle. I don't know what you mean. And Sage, darn it late. Oh, well, thank you for all the tutorials. No problem. All right. Okay. Let's see. Paisley, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Paisley. Yes, that's what I was trying to think of. Good Lord. Let's see. Still recommend a gloss medium finish for marble. I know you usually don't use any gloss. Yeah, something satiny. I think it still really works well. Probably more satin, like not you. You never go full gloss. You know, it's just a rule. But something satiny, maybe with a drop of gloss in it, I think is the right answer still. More classic dwarf weapon, axe or hammer. Pick. They're miners. There you go. All right, that brings us to the end. I can't think of a better answer to end on. So with that, we'll call it a day here. But as I said, if you do think of some more questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer. Well, just as I answer everything that gets asked on my video, so I will certainly do so. But I hope this was very helpful for you. And I do hope I answered a lot of your questions. Like I said, we do this about once a month. Next month should be about the same time. Next month begins with Gen Con and like ends with NashCon and Nova. So August is just going to be a jam-packed month. But I'm really excited about some of the tutorials I've got coming up. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We've got some more interviews booked, so that's going to be really great. And we got a bunch of interesting news in Age of Sigmar. So like we're banging on all cylinders here. It's a summer of winning. That's what I say. But so look for this. I always try to post this a few hours in advance. This one was pretty quick because I didn't know exactly how my schedule was going to work out today. But generally, I'll try to post it at least 8 hours in advance of when I'm going to do this. So if you, like I said, if you have any other questions, drop it down below. But other than that, thank you very much for watching. I certainly appreciate it, everyone. I hope this was helpful. And as always, we'll see you next time.